Good morning, everyone. My name is Kayla Mack, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to day 2 of negotiated rulemaking with the AIM Committee. We are going to go through a quick roll call of our primaries, alternates, and representatives from the department so that we can all be read into the record. When I call your constituency group, I'll say primary. Please state your name into the record, and then I'll move on to alternate should there be one. Please state your name into the record. Remember to turn those mics on and speak directly into them so that we can capture it. Beginning with our constituency for students and loan borrowers, our primary.
Magnus Noble.
And our alternate.
Ryan Hofer.
Welcome. For our veterans and service members, our primary.
Julie Howell.
And our alternate.
Stuart Helgeson.
Thank you very much. For organizations representing workforce development needs, our primary.
Siri Turgeson.
Thank you. For our legal assistance organizations, consumer advocates, and civil rights organizations, we have our primary.
A.D. Mudson.
Thank you. For public institutions of higher education, we have our primary.
Monty Sullivan.
And we have our alternate, Luciano DeCastro, who will be joining us later this week. For private nonprofit institutions of higher education, we have our primary.
David Eubanks.
Thank you. And our alternate.
Bill Hathaway.
Thank you. For our proprietary institutions of higher education, we have our primary.
Jeffrey Bodemer.
Thank you. And our alternate.
David Cohen.
Thank you. For state officials, including governors, state higher education executive officers, we have our primary.
Ray Rodriguez.
And we have our alternate.
Mike Duffy.
Thank you. For institutional accrediting agencies recognized by the secretary, we have our primary.
Michael McComas.
And we have our alternate.
Heather Perfetti.
Thank you. For programmatic accrediting agencies recognized by the secretary, we have our primary.
Rebecca Busaka.
Thank you. And we have our alternate.
Brian Kessler.
Thank you. For organizations representing taxpayers and the public interest, we have our primary.
Michael Shires.
Thank you. And we have our alternate.
Jim Blue.
Thank you. For our nascent accreditation organizations not currently recognized by the secretary, we have our primary.
Mark Becker.
Thank you. And our alternate.
Jade Foster.
Thank you. And for our National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality and Integrity, we have our primary.
Jennifer Bloom here.
Thank you. From the department's Office of General Counsel, we have.
Jake Vallow.
Thank you. And our subject matter expert from the Office of Post-Secondary Education.
Beth Daggett.
And last but not least, we have our federal negotiator.
Jeff Andrade.
Thank you all very much. Before we move into the text, I would like to hand it over to Jeff to see if there are any logistical or procedural updates that we might want to share for the good of the group.
Yeah, we have a couple of items this morning, and welcome back, everyone. First, one thing that a couple of people had come up to me afterwards, and we were going back and forth, and this is probably not the first time I'm going to misspeak. Or it's the first time I'm going to misspeak. I misspoke in the meeting, but probably not the last time. When we were talking about separate and independent, I was sort of looking at a paragraph which was dealing with trade associations, and I made a reference that that applies to programmatics only. I did not mean to infer that the separate and independent section only applies to programmatic accreditors. So if anyone, I understand that everyone's sort of hanging on every word. We did not change our interpretation on that overnight. So that's one. The second one is you guys get emails from constituents and friends, and we do too. So we did get some correspondence from Senator Banks from Indiana's office, and I did want to read a statement into the record from a group of his constituents that contacted him. And they say, quote, several Indiana institutions of higher education have had negative experiences with programmatic accreditors, especially in the health professions over the last 5 years. We are all hoping that the negotiated rulemaking will address some of these issues and increase accountability for the programmatic accreditors and create pathways for institutions to get quicker and fairer review processes. The incentive for these programmatic accreditors are in the wrong places. They are incentivized to keep the supply of qualified graduates low so the demand stays high. Accordingly, they find ridiculous reasons to deny new programs from getting started and often are capricious in their decisions, closing down programs that have 100% placement rates and the like. To address the healthcare needs across the state, we need many more programs graduating prepared practitioners every single year, and we hope these new regulations will address this matter once and for all. So that is from a group of constituents for Senator Banks, and we appreciate Senator Banks's office sending that to us. And then finally, the last housekeeping is our Assistant Secretary, Dr. David Barker, who is both a advocate for students and an advocate for innovation, has a few remarks based on some of the comments from yesterday's conversation. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Barker.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Great to see everyone again this morning. A few comments have been made about the costs and potential disadvantages of innovation in higher education. I appreciate the comments because it gives us an opportunity to re-examine some of our fundamental assumptions, which is always a good thing. And it's true that change is hard, but students benefit from innovation. From the Gutenberg Press 600 years ago to the Morrill Act of 1862 to evening and weekend courses and certificates, community colleges and learning management systems, innovations have there have been innovations in higher education that have clearly benefited students, and all of these innovations have faced resistance. Right, the Gutenberg Press, the presses were sabotaged by scribes whose educational investments were threatened by this new investment. But we believe that innovation has been worth the cost of disruption. That's one reason why the I in AIM is for innovation. But as Brian Rosenberg and others have pointed out, higher education has been far less innovative than other industries. It seems paradoxical that higher education, which has produced many innovations through research activities, is very slow to innovate in its educational mission, but both are true. Educational innovation is badly needed to reduce costs, incorporate AI into teaching and evaluation, and make better use of students' valuable time as innovation in other industries creates more opportunities for them. As Michael pointed out yesterday, accreditation is not the only reason that higher education has been sluggish, but we believe it is one cause. The stasis that Cody described yesterday is not the way to deliver innovation. The Biden administration placed a moratorium on new accreditor applications and blocked institutions from switching accreditors. In a situation like that, accreditors have very little incentive to invest time and resources into investigating and approving new educational models. Companies innovate to beat their competitors. With no competitors, life is easy and innovation is a low priority. We want universities to compete with each other on quality and price. This competition will spur them to innovate to produce quality education at lower prices. We also want accreditors to compete with each other. If accreditors have no competition, they will also resist innovation. With competition, they will compete to be the best signal of quality. That signal might differ by accreditor, which is entirely appropriate because different consumers demand different combinations of quality and price. Recognizing that different institutions have different levels of quality is not a race to the bottom. It is a recognition of reality. Current accreditors give universities and colleges pass-fail grades, which provide very little useful information to students. That is why our work here is often so obscure. Students don't know or care who accredits their institution. Competition will include competition for relevance, and universities will signal their quality level through accreditation, similar to what happens in many other industries. The department will set a floor, and agencies below that floor will lose recognition, limiting race to the bottom risk. With regional and programmatic monopolies, withdrawal of recognition can throw industries into chaos. Agencies know this and push the boundaries without being derecognized. If alternatives are available, if competition exists, any hesitation to derecognize agencies disappears. We shouldn't fear healthy competition. It is the basis of a free market economy, and we need more of it in the coddled, protected business of higher education. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Barker. We will now resume our walkthrough of the red lines. We are currently in subpart B, the criteria for recognition, organizational and administrative requirements, and we will be on 602.15, which are the administrative and fiscal responsibilities. That'll appear if you're on the initial draft, page 35.
Jeff, I see a card. Would you mind if I go to that before you get started?
Sure.
Jennifer, please.
Sorry, I think we never discussed sorry, I hate to go backwards, but we never discussed 14 on page 32. And so I just had one quick question. I can do it later or whenever.
Sure. I don't have a problem skipping back.
Please share your question.
I don't understand it. I don't understand the verb interlock. So and maybe that's a legal term that I'm not remembering from whatever, but so it reads, any officers, directors, or employees of an agency must not interlock by serving as a paid. So is there a more layman-like term that we could use other than interlock or?
I'll turn to Jake in a second, but as you can imagine, as a layman myself, I also raised that issue. And the attorney said, "Oh, everybody knows what this means." Or no, but no.
I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I'm like, and it's an embarrassing moment for me. And I do know I do know what like interlocutory. I know the term, but it's I think not the right term.
So I'll turn it to Jake to talk about the term of art, and that's one that I sort of kept my powder dry on.
Jake, please.
So I would say that this is not a legal term of art. It's just it's a term that I understand it's a little outside of common parlance, but I think we used it because effectively what we mean here is overlapping, but interlocking is a little bit more broad. Interlocking also means fitting together or working alongside. So it could cover a little bit wider basis than just overlapping. I think we could probably change it if there's a lot of concern about clarity there. But I believe the intent there is to basically, make it clear that it goes a little bit beyond just like formally serving on a board or something in another agency and just overlapping membership to, actually being employed by, fitting together with, something like that.
Yeah, the intent is that it is broader than overlapping, and I think since we have a professor of business at the table who has her card up, I think she may have some good color on this as well.
Theory, I was going to you next, please.
Thank you, Kayla. I love this term because we have a huge body of research in corporate governance on director interlock. So we're looking at different types of interlocking relationships. There's direct, if one person sits on two boards at the same time. There's indirect, if you've got someone on this board and someone on this board, but then they're both on a different board together. So the idea is that there are relationships here, and actually you can really easily capture them in network analysis. That's it.
Thank you, Siri. Jennifer, did you have any follow-up before I move on?
I think it's really, really, really important. This goes to like the point about transparency and understanding what we mean. I think it's super important that when you're writing, it would be one thing if this were used in statute and then the department decided, oh, I'm going to explain what this means, but you're going to have to write guidance on this. And I would way prefer that it be in regs and not sub-regulatory guidance. So, because sub-regulatory guidance can be changed. So I'm fine with what you just described, Siri, and I'm fine with what you just described, Jacob, I think, except for that until you put it in writing, I'm not sure. And so I just think it's so important in this exercise to say what we mean.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jake, I'm going to go to you, and then David, I'll be over to you.
Yeah, I think that this is something that, we could very clearly explain in the preamble. It's one of those things that like we could write it into the regs, I think. I don't think we have opposition to the concept of putting it in the regs. It just gets laborious to and kind of tedious to write everything out here. This is kind of this is very much a product of the fact that we are trying to bring over the best practices from corporate board formation and corporate governance. And so that language is, carried over, but I realize that, we're in a different world here to some extent. This is not, the corporate world. Everybody reading this might not necessarily know what it means. So to that extent, I think we're probably comfortable, at the very least, explaining this thoroughly in the preamble, if not providing more detailed guidance here.
So the preamble is even worse to me than some regulatory guidance. So I'll just say that, or maybe it's equally concerning. I just really feel, and I'll just say it again, that we're talking. And I really respect the idea of bringing sort of the business concepts into this, except for that we're not in the business world. We're in the higher ed world. And we're in peer review, which we don't have peer review in the corporate world. Like, that is anti-competitive behavior in the corporate world, but it's not in higher ed. And this is something that I said yesterday, that this is going to be an exercise in a delicate balance of navigating what we still want to support in higher education and what needs to shift. And I'm right there with you on the wanting to shift, but I really feel strongly that we can't bring everything from the private marketplace and the corporate world into this. We can bring some of it, but we can't bring everything. And in this situation, I don't know where I'm landing because I don't know what part of interlock you're meaning to say.
Jeff, please.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say, Jennifer, is we all know that higher education is first and foremost a business. So it may be its own world and have its own mores, but it's a business, and it's a very big business.
I'm going to move on in cards. Jennifer, if you have something else, put your comment card back up, please. David, thank you for your patience.
Yes, thank you. And I very, very much appreciated all the conversation around this. A very complex issue, but I think I understand the problem and it's serious. I also heard from a constituent that speaks directly to this, except that the accreditor in question is not recognized. So this fix, in my understanding, wouldn't address them. So my question is kind of top level. Are we doing this in the Higher Ed Act because we don't have the tools to do it across the board? Or it seems like it would create an incentive for an actor that's behaving like a guild to just say, well, I'll give up recognition and get out of all of this.
So, we believe it's appropriate here because this is really the section in the organizational requirements that set the basic tone and that talk about corporate structure. And so that's why we think that, this is the appropriate area to introduce those concepts, which again are common elsewhere throughout the economy and through other organizations.
Any follow-up, David? Okay. Michael, you have the floor. Michael. Mike, then you're next.
So Undersecretary Kent yesterday used the word durability or durable regulations. And so sometimes simple is best. I don't know whether or not, I think most people would understand the word also. So may not also serve would be far easier to understand, far more direct. And I don't know that interlock does anything to strengthen the concept of may not also serve. So that's an edit that I'll put up.
Any response before I move on?
No, thank you, Mike. And I'm generally a person who also likes simple and minimalist approach to regulations. And I appreciate your comments on that.
Thank you, Michael. Mike, I'm happy to give you the floor.
Thank you. The intent here is to create this separation between the accrediting body and the trade association or the organization. I guess one thought that comes to mind in this is you can envision a scenario in the future where somebody would move back and forth between these entities and say, this week I'm on this board, this week I'm on this board. So I'm wondering if there needs to be some sort of time dimension to this to say, I mean, you could take the lobbying approach where you say you have to wait a year before you assume one of these roles. So I'm just wondering if there needs to be a time dimension in this in order to really create that separation.
Please, Jeff.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. It's a good point. So we'll take a look at that.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jeff. Mark, I'm over to you.
So the comment by Jacob around corporate board governance really clarifies for me why we're having so much trouble with language, because that's not the right model here. The right model is not-for-profit board governance. These entities are not for profits. And yes, Jeff, they are businesses. I ran over a $1 billion university for over 12 years, but as a not-for-profit and within a state entity and a state structure. And corporate board governance is not the model that fits this world. It doesn't suit this world. And the persistence of the language to try to force it into a world where it doesn't exist is problematic.
Thank you, Mark. Jeff?
Appreciate that comment, Mark. Thank you.
Jake, anything?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I think I would push back on that a little bit. Nonprofit corporations are still corporations. Corporate best practices, like in terms of managing conflicts of interest and in terms of, ensuring that proper firewalls are in place, should apply in nonprofits just as they apply in corporations. While I realize that, the canon of law and the details of, what goes into corporate formations is far more, or for-profit corporations is far more defined as a result of things like shareholder litigation. That doesn't change the fact that the best practices of ensuring that there aren't conflicts and that, we are actually properly screening is not still relevant. Certainly, I know there's been quite a bit of literature that's been written recently about best practices within nonprofits, and they have focused on many things like that. And I think it's a false dichotomy to try to basically use a separate set of language to, treat nonprofit corporations different than for-profit corporations in this context, especially when there's nothing within the statute that it precludes a for-profit corporation from serving as an accreditor.
Thank you, Jake. Mark, any brief follow-up before I move on? Okay, thank you. Magnus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Caleb. So I have to agree with Jennifer and Mark on this. Higher education is a space for not only practices in nonprofit governance, but also public governance. When we think about our public universities, our public community colleges, it's a practice in public governance. Now, I am a student. I study public and nonprofit administration. Granted, my experience in the field is fledgling compared to many of the other folks at the table, but I do think that maybe one of the higher level failures of how we structure higher education in this country from a student perspective is that we view it as a business, and then students become consumers from which to extract profit, and that profit comes largely in the form of $30 billion in the Pell Grant every year. We have $1.7 trillion of student loan debt right now, much of which is Title IV loans that are taxpayer funded. So I do want to push back on the idea that corporate governance is the best place here, and recognizing that there are proprietary institutions which are for profit and may operate much closer to corporate governance. But from a student perspective, I think it is largely a mistake that has been growing in the public sector at large, but especially in higher education, to view it as a business and only as a business, where it should be viewed as a service that's offered to the public, much like the K-12 system, where it is an entitlement, it is a right, it is a public service that betters our society, and higher education, I think, falls into that category as well.
Thank you, Magnus. Any response, department, before I move on?
I guess the only point that I would say to that is that the role of accreditors are not just a private role. They are serving a function for the public at large. And I think that raises the stakes in terms of accountability and some of the protections against anything where within the governance structure, people are getting some type of a private gain, or they're not acting solely in the service of the public good. And so, and Jake, if you want to chime in on that, I'll yield in a second. But that's really what the focus is here, because again, this is not a club or a private membership organization, that serves the individual needs of those entities that are members. There's a broader function here. And Jake, if you want to talk about it more.
Yeah, I mean, putting your point, the merits of your point aside, I understand your concern there. I don't think employing, best corporate practices rules in terms of things like managing conflicts of interest is at odds with what you're saying. I actually think that better protects students. As you said, higher education is often viewed as a business. Certainly there are proprietary entities within this space. By not employing rules like this, we are actually creating a greater potential for students to be harmed, institutions to be harmed, by not recognizing the reality that people are treating it like a business and not bringing over the best aspects of that management, which is frankly the way boards are formed and conflicts of interest are managed. By not doing that, we're actually allowing those conflicts of interest to really rise to the front. And especially when we're talking about, voluntary membership organizations, it really, really allows for industry capture to occur and the, intent of those organizations to be perverted to some extent. I mean, you've raised the concern about a race to the bottom. Without proper conflict of interest management, that really increases the likelihood of that happening. You have to keep those things separate, and that's what we're attempting to do here.
Thank you, Jake. Magnus, did you have any brief follow-up?
Yeah. Thank you for that, Jake. I would just encourage the department and everyone else at the table to think about where corporate best practices apply and where they don't, because in the higher education space, I think that those best practices don't always and should not always translate. So I think everyone at the table has made great points. So I just encourage all of us to think really critically when this point is brought up about whether corporate governance structure and nonprofit or public governance structure really applies when we're discussing those issues.
Thank you. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Yeah, I want to sort of circle back just to digest this conversation. So I want to, so Jeff, I really support everything you said about the public. And I also, as you well know, I think just from my experience on Nasiki, I fully support where the department is going on separate and independent. I very much disagree with what Jake said, though, about the need for bringing in the corporate. When you're looking at corporate law, and I'm not nearly the expert that Siri is, but I have been around the block a while and I am a lawyer. Actually, corporate law is based on shareholders, and it's a totally different concept than protecting the public. Both can be, so I want to focus on protecting the public here. And to me, protecting the public in this section is about clarity, transparency to a creditor so they know where the guardrails are, where they don't know where the guardrails are. And I'm going to go back to the very first thing I said, which is I don't understand what you're saying beyond what Michael suggested, which is really clear. I don't understand what else you might be getting at. And because you do include breadth, which I think is really great on the rest of the paragraph, you're saying you can't be unpaid officer, paid or unpaid officer, director, employee, volunteer. I mean, you've covered all of the bases and then all of the organizations that matter, which I also really support that you included licensure boards in particular. I'll just throw that out. So I love the rest of the paragraph. I just think this is clean by saying may not serve as a, and then you've got the breadth. And so it feels like, and I'm just going to call it out, like it feels like I don't know what else the game of gotcha is going to be. Like I don't know what the what is. And so I have a real problem with it. And I especially have a real problem with it in the context of the nonprofit. I think a lot of people talk about nonprofit institutions. Right here, we're talking about nonprofit accrediting agencies who are bound by other state laws that are corporate. So they are already bound by other state laws and regulations relating to conflicts of interest and all that already. So they already do have those protections. So I would really ask that the department take this back and delete interlock and put may not serve.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Michael's mouthing to me, just for everybody who's on video. Also, may not also serve.
Thank you. Any response before I move to the next card? Okay. Rebecca, you have the floor.
Yeah, just a quick question here. Will this affect CEOs and accreditors that serve on the ACE board or the CHIA board?
The initial gut check here is no, but let us talk about it and see if there's any other scenarios before you take that one in charge, and I have to come back tomorrow and then backtrack. So but initially I don't think so.
Okay, and Mike just showed me it, and I probably shouldn't have asked. It was of the agency, so I think we're good. And also,
Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. Siri, I'm going to go over to you.
Okay, thanks so much. I'll just raise a point of clarity on interlock. So what we've been talking about is the direct relationship. But let's say that there's this board C. It's not just about A and B serving on each other's boards, but if they serve through C, then that's also an interlocking directorship. And there has been some research in nonprofits on this. I found only one study of accreditors, which was in Chile, but it did show that those interlocking directorships were more likely to have some conflicts of interest and some collusive voting behavior.
Thank you, Siri. I'm going to move on to Ray. You are next, please.
Thank you. I would like to trade out with my alternate, Mike Duffy.
All right, let's acknowledge that for this constituency group. We have Mike Duffy, alternate, coming to the table for state officials. Thank you, Mike.
And everyone, not to take it off the interlock discussion, but I wanted to ask a question about 13 and 60214. Specifically, the requirement is that the restriction is necessary for any additional level of required education, taking steps to increase credentialing standard, that it be necessary to protect the public, and that the expected public benefits outweigh the costs. And I wanted to ask the department, it's easy to imagine a scenario in which we're protecting the public in medicine, but is it not possible that increasing the required education would be necessary for the skills of graduates for a profession such as engineering, and it would not necessarily be necessary to protect the public?
Can you go through that just one more time for me, Al, so I get each of the elements?
The entirety of the requirement in 13 is that any steps to increase credentialing standards or increase the cost or level of required education is necessary to protect the public. And it's not an or, it's an and, that the expected public benefits outweigh the costs. Meaning, you could demonstrate that the public benefit outweighs the cost, but you would still have to demonstrate that it protects the public. And there are quality improvements that can occur for graduates in education that are not necessarily related only to benefiting the public and protecting the public.
So your suggestion is that be an or?
I don't know that that's sufficient, because I think we would need something that allows for an increase in quality that is accepted in that discipline or in education for graduates generally.
So what is your alternative suggestion there for that? I mean, obviously we're trying to get at, credential inflation here, and introduce the concept of a cost benefit analysis. So if you think we've gone too far over, where do you think the line should be drawn?
I think perhaps that's, we would not slow the meeting down today, but we would caucus and come back to you with some language.
Okay. We'll look at it.
Thank you both. Next, please, Mark.
So I'm going back to Rebecca's question in 14. If I understand this, if you're a director of the agency and you're also, say, a director or a member of the board of a membership organization, such as the ones Rebecca mentioned, you would be in conflict here. Is that not correct? So if you were a member of the CHIA board or a unpaid volunteer, so a member of the board or any committee or anything that CHIA would do, and you're a member of the board of an accrediting body, that would be a conflict. I just want to make sure that that is the intent.
You're a member of you're a member of CHIA, of the CHIA board was the scenario that you're talking about, and you're also an executive officer of an accreditor
Or a director, yeah.
or a director, and if that's a conflict, I'm actually going to defer to Jake on that one.
I think that was Rebecca's question. Yeah.
So I think the question comes down to like, what is the authority of CHIA over the agency? And so within the realm of CHIA, obviously they can recognize or not recognize that, but in terms of the Title IV framework, it's a little bit different. And I guess what we're probably going to take back is whether or not that decision over the agency is enough to create a conflict. So the initial read is that we still don't think it's a problem because they don't regulate the agency from our perspective.
Mark, do you have any brief follow-up?
Just that the way it's written, it does appear to say that there is a conflict. So, this has happened a few times yesterday and today where I read it one way, but I hear you interpret it a different way. And it's that lack of clarity that gives me pause.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark. Rebecca, I'm back over to you. No problem. Magnus, and then I'm over to Jennifer.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to Chancellor Duffy's point and the point made by the department. I think that students, by and large, share the department's concern about, I think you used degree inflation. It's often called degree creep as well. So, of course, I think one of the most famous examples of that is physical therapy, which once required a bachelor's degree and then shifted to a doctorate. So I think that's definitely a place that adds burden to students, especially with cost, because we know graduate degrees are incredibly expensive and are making up the bulk of student debt these days. However, I do understand Chancellor Duffy's points, and I will admit that I don't have any great suggestions for how to reconcile the two, but I look forward to hearing the results of perhaps a future caucus between the department and CHIOs to do that. I think students would be really interested in looking at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Magnus. Jennifer, please.
So I think the CHIA issue is sticky because it's not just a membership organization, it's a recognizing body. And actually, there have been moments where statutes have even referenced CHIA, not federal, but and so that one is sticky. So I think that actually almost deserves, that's one category, whereas ACE is just a general, broad, doesn't have influence, so I would, we're getting really weedy, but it's actually important to think about. And so I just wanted to call out that CHIA is a recognizing entity. And so it does have a different meaning. So we do need to be thoughtful about that. The other suggestion, I'm not quite sure where it belongs or whatever, but I was thinking about my own life and my own sort of extracurricular activities that don't relate to a field of study or whatever. And so I do think field of study, something that you have related, but I do feel like something that brings it into the zone of the profession a little bit more, because somebody can sit on more than one board that's not related. And I just think it needs to be really, really clear that we're not talking about that. I also finally just wanted to, on this series comment, I I think it's a bridge too far to go through every single, like, if I'm understanding what you mean by interlocking now, sort of the subsidiary scenarios and that is very much a corporate concern, and I understand it. It actually, and I don't want to make it like a general statement of it doesn't live, but in the world of accreditate, like I can't even dream up a scenario. Like I'm sitting here trying to think about like, oh, how would okay, now I understand what she meant by interlock, but I can't think of it. I can't even think of an example. So if I can't think of an example, and if it does come up someday, I think there are plenty of other tools to attack it. And so, I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Any response before I move on?
No, and again, our initial response with regard to CHIA, and I said, well, we're going to look at it a little bit more, was that we were looking at it as, from the federal perspective, as just another association. But I understand Jennifer's point that there are some realms.
Brief follow-up, Jennifer, and then I'll move over to Michael.
So I can't even take credit for this comment. I just received a really good point. We have NASIKI members who sit on accrediting, but have or do sit on accrediting bodies. So I think we need to think about that. I don't, but
Yeah, and those members recuse themselves when those agencies come forward.
But that's true in general. So I just want to point out, I've been thinking about the recusal piece a lot in this conversation. And so I think that's something that you could beef up the recusal language that I think is somewhere in regs. But we could beef up language around recusing oneself as well. So that does obviously that happens every day in accreditation, of course. So if
and that's also inherent in the references on conflicts training as well. I think we specifically call those out.
Thank you. Michael, you have the floor.
So oftentimes we come in here and talk about colons and em dashes and commas, and I think this is one of those areas where, as a drafting, it would really matter if you put a colon after any or if you put it after affiliated, because it can be read either way, meaning of both the agency and any colon, related, associated, or affiliated trade association, that would only apply to that one trade association, and everything else would just be a professional organization. If you put the colon after affiliated, then everything that follows from that is within the realm of related, associated, or affiliated. So it depends on what your intent is on how you want to limit that to what Jennifer had brought up, to just narrowing the band. It's not any professional organization. It's one that is related, associated, or affiliated. I think that's what the intent is, but I'm not sure based upon the way that it's written.
Yeah. Related, associated, and affiliated are now a defined term specifically. And so we reference there. And then there's also additional, in this particular case, there's additional associations that were added to it.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jeff. Rebecca, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I had a couple of questions about this. My colleague that's sitting here with us, he's on the COCA board. He's on another board, and he indicated that this is very prominent within the health professions, where individuals are affiliated with multiple boards, but he's also affiliated with the accreditor. And so, this is really an important point. And Mike, coming in from the state of Ohio, I'm curious how this would impact the workforce development boards, and even Ray for that matter. It's very common that, we work with our local workforce board system. And so, and we're extending out into short-term workforce Pell style programs that will look to the local workforce boards. We're going to begin, I believe, to integrate these systems. So, Jeff and the team, if you could think about it too from that perspective, not just higher education, how will this impact what's coming down the pike with workforce Pell? And I can say I'm working with Heather and several other institutional accreditors to review and evaluate workforce development programs, adult ed programs, workforce Pell programs, and we're situating ourselves within the accreditor to cover an area that's not well covered in our industry today. So, I don't want to destroy that partnership and the good work that we're doing, which I think directly correlates to this AIM committee and, modernizing accreditation. So anyhow,
Yeah.
thoughts?
Okay. Well, no, I appreciate that too. I mean, we're 44 minutes into the hour, and so I've heard a lot on this. I think this is something the department should probably call a caucus on with some interested parties. There's some parties I'd like to bring in from the department that aren't here on this as well, and maybe we can have some more robust discussion and some back and forth. In addition to some of the members that we have at the table. So, and with that, I would like to move us to 602-15. So hopefully everybody's there. Again, that's on page 35. What we did here was to try to actually remove regulations as opposed to add requirements. And so we think this is basically a paring back to the requirements of the statute. And it was sort of some of our earliest texts in terms of trying to deregulate in this area. So would be interested in with that any comments, and then there was a few clarifications later on in the section with regard to basically corresponding to earlier changes we made with regard to volunteers and what have you. So that's what that's about. And so I'll open it up to any questions. I know we had some new language down in C. We might have the earlier discussion on the first part, and then we can go down to that.
Thank you, Jeff. Jennifer, will you get us started?
I just want to make sure on the training piece that I'm understanding what so you're deleting the requirement that the agency train its volunteers and folks. Am I right? I mean, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the requirement that they use people who are trained to actually do accreditation.
So the training piece has been moved to on page 36, paragraph 3. That part addresses training.
Well, so that it doesn't require the training. It just says that when you provide the training, it needs to be low cost. So it just says training provided, but it doesn't mandate the training. It's just the training provided should not be cost prohibitive or whatever, or affect the cost. So I just want to that's how I read it anyway. Like, I don't read it. I read that you're not requiring, which, I mean, I just want to understand the interpretation. I understand cutting back, and believe me, I totally support there a lot of stuff that is not so important to have in regs. But it looks like the mandate of required training is gone. But if you have it, so that's how I interpret it, is you're getting rid of it and you're saying, but if you do have training, it needs to be low cost.
Yeah, I think the inherent assumption was that training was built in, and then we just basically elaborated what the training was like. But if you think that training should be continue that's not a hill we're going to die on. Okay. So I think that we can reference it, but I think it was expected that it was inherent in there and didn't need to be specifically addressed in the beginning part of the section.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jeff. Monty, I'm going to move on to you and then Mike. But before I do, Beth, please.
Just really quick, Jennifer, it looks like at the beginning, so if you're in 60215, it says that the agency has training. So you have to start with the STEM. So the agency meets this requirement if the agency demonstrates that the agency has, and then you go to 3, training provided to all agency representatives, emphasizing the accreditation requirements.
Thank you, Beth.
Wait, hold on. I think structurally that whole paragraph, now that you mention it, doesn't flow correctly, but maybe I'm wrong. So I'm going to take this back and see that it flows.
Monty, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kayla. Looking at, going back to page 35, paragraph A1, the adequate financial resources. It's fairly clear, I think, across time that those institutions that have had trouble with institutional accreditation, many of them deal with difficult financial arrangements, whatever that may look like in their institution. And so as I think about the word adequate financial resource, think about the last 40 years and how higher education has changed from a financial perspective. I wonder if maybe there isn't a need for a deeper expression of what adequate resource really means, and to reference the fact that it needs to not be a single standard that is today's standard that would still be here 40 years from now. The reality is that if we had looked back to tuition in my organization 40 years ago, we didn't charge tuition. We registered students. Today, tuition is 70% of our total. And so if that doesn't indicate a change in the structure of the organization, the financial model, I think it's important that we go a bit deeper than just simply adequate financial resource. I don't have a recommendation for you, but I'm certainly willing to work on language.
Yeah. So I think on that, it is a subjective term, both from the staffing level and from the NSEKI and quite honestly, the SDO level as well. Each of them are looking at it. We've had agencies that have come in where their financials do not look good, and, relative to when you think about things that could happen. I mean, they have reserves, but you look at the potentials for litigation, and then those reserves could evaporate pretty quickly. We look at sort of the ongoing cash flow going into the institution. So I mean, in terms of, if your concern is that this allows somebody to skate through, I can tell you, at least from the review perspective and the monitoring perspective, we are looking at that relative to our professional judgment, at each step in the process. So I don't know if that gives you any comfort.
Follow-up, Monty?
Quick follow-up. I would encourage the department, as you look at that issue, to pay attention to those institutions that are subject to natural disaster. Louisiana is an example. Hurricane season happens to fall in August, right after you register students. And so what happens with that institution were it to go through some of these challenges, very similar in other states with other natural disaster kind of prone areas? I think it's important that we pay attention, particularly from a student perspective, that we are paying attention to the needs of students in that circumstance and not simply looking at only the institution's viability, but looking at the ability to be able to put that student back in their original position. I'm sorry. You're right. Yep. Confused. Sorry about that. I apologize.
Thank you, Monty. Jeff?
Yeah, I think the back and forth that just happened was that confusing institution with a creditor. But I could see, after a natural disaster, that would put strain on a volunteer-driven agency in a particular area. So I think accounting for weather-related disasters is, along with other factors, is probably important for us to be looking at too in terms of the adequacy. We need to be looking at potential stress on the structure.
Thank you, Jeff. Jake?
Yeah, and keeping it broad and not putting in specific guidelines there allows us greater leeway to do that.
Thank you all. Michael, you have the floor.
I see the root and I see the way that you've tied this together. I guess I'm just wondering, in reviewing agencies, do you find that as you're thinking about particularly bringing new agencies in, that it is a forward-drawn conclusion that the training in all of these areas, as you said, Jeff, just, it is happening, and that it doesn't need to be called out in regulation? Is there some basis for striking all of this, which is a really important part of helping agencies be able to conduct its work? That as new board members come on, they get training. As new volunteers come on, it's a peer review process. Sometimes it can be even by people that are familiar with it. The process itself can still can benefit much from additional training from the agency. So, there's some elements of 2 that I would really advocate to keep, or at least maybe move to 3. If you want to keep training as a standalone item, because now the way that you have it is training is really just about unnecessarily increasing institutional costs as opposed to the best way to go about our work. And I don't think that's the intent here. And so I just want to make sure I understand it.
Yeah. So again, in the first instance, the assumption was you're bringing on qualified staff. They're there. That's a superfluous requirement. And again, we thought it was already addressed because we're discussing training later, and then we're sort of also saying, and when you're doing your training, here's what you need to cover. But again, it's not a die on the hill issue for me to put training back in there, particularly as one that was sort of urging us to not go beyond the statute as we were going through this. So if there's a consensus for putting it in, I think we're open to putting that phrase back in.
Well, maybe it's just under number 3, training provided to all agency representatives and staff, and then maybe just keeping as on their responsibilities or appropriate to their roles. Maybe that's enough. That then goes on to emphasize these other things that you have, as an additional piece of it as well.
Thank you, Michael. Anything additional from the department before I move on in cards?
Yeah, no, I mean, Beth reminded me, our internal discussion was we were trying to give agencies flexibility in terms of the training there, and not feeling like they had to do it in each particular instance.
Thank you, Jeff. Magnus, you have the floor.
Thanks, Kayla. I noticed that Jennifer has her card up, so if she has a particular issue to raise about training, I'd like us to go ahead and move forward with that conversation first.
Number of cards up, and I can never know who exactly wants to speak with what, so I'd like to honor the protocols and go in order. Thank you.
Sure. So my concern lies starting at the bottom of page 36 in what I believe will become paragraph 5. So we talked about it a little bit earlier in the previous section about conflict of interest, and I do think this is an area where students really should have a vested interest. And so the way that I'm reading this, because beginning with Romanet 1, we've stricken board members, added officers and directors. Romanet 2, we've stricken commissioners, added employees, part-time, full-time, temporary. And then later on in 5, moved administrative staff. So please correct my interpretation of this if it's incorrect, but it seems like we're removing those restrictions for much higher level officials and only like weakening it essentially and only having it apply to more lower level staff. So if that interpretation is wrong, please correct me.
No, I think what was envisioned here was to use broader terminology. And so like in terms of board members, you'd capture not only the board members, but also all the officers and directors. And then commissioners is sort of a proprietary, not proprietary school, but within this realm. And we wanted to capture all employees, in addition to the commission. So it's a broadening of the terminology.
Any follow-up before I move on, Magnus?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I would, for the sake of clarity, maybe reinstate the board members and commissioners and administrative staff just for the sake of like covering all of our bases there. So we could say board members or board members, officers and directors, commissioners and employees, including temporary, part-time, full-time, administrative staff and volunteers. I just want to make sure that it's very clear that we're trying to cover everybody. I understand you're trying to use some more broad language, but it might be worth adding some of that specificity back.
So just to clarify, so everybody that's currently covered now is covered. And then it's also bringing in contractors and volunteers. So it's broadening of the pool. And then even with all those changes, if you go down to Romanet 6, other agency representatives is the catch-all. So everybody. So again, this, in our view, it's a broadening. I think, having board members and officers and directors, to us, I think it's probably makes it more confusing because board members are a subset within that group. But what was the other? Commissioners, commissioners could be in either group. I'm not sure if that's specific enough. It's not a defined term, but again, we're willing to discuss it and take a look. But again, the concept here, and we believe the way it's written captures everybody plus bring in some others.
Thank you, Jeff. Jake?
Yeah, officers and directors should capture everybody who's included as either a board member or a commissioner. As Jeff said, I think we could potentially add members back in just to account for the different, terminologies that organizations use, depending on how they're formed. Commissioners, I don't think we want to add back in because they would be defined as officers within an organization's governing documents. And then, as Jeff said, like administrative staff already fall under the employee bucket, so they should already be fully covered there. The only reason that was struck is because we're using that line to put volunteers in, and we added employees in above.
Magnus, if you have more, will you leave your card up and I'll circle back to you? Mike, I'm over to you, and then Jennifer.
Thank you. I just want to echo, and I know that Jeff, you already mentioned this, that the striking of the language in part 2 on page 35 and part 3 was intended to kind of broaden the opportunities for innovation. And I think that's an important point. So many of these rules are written around the kind of former regional accreditor structure and the language that they use. But in an era where you're having innovation and trying to create new accreditors, leveraging new technologies and new opportunities, it's really important to broaden that language. And Michael made this point as well, to broaden that language in a way that allows those opportunities and addition of experts, for example, to site visit teams and things like that. So I just want to emphasize that that's, I think, an important part of the work that's been done in this space.
Thank you, Mike. Any response?
No, yeah, we appreciate, that clearly is the intent, and we appreciate Mike pointing that out.
Follow-up?
And maybe a simple solution to the training question is to put a comma or a semicolon after the word staff on point 3, because it isolates the training and then it makes the secondary point.
Thank you for that.
Point taken. Thank you.
Jennifer, you have the floor.
Yeah, first of all, on the point that Magnus raised, I just want to support the department's list. I think it's more clear, and I appreciate the addition of volunteers, and so I think that language is good. I did draft some language on 3 that I can send to you. What I did was, it will now, if you what I've drafted says, training provided to all agency representatives and staff necessary for each of their roles, comma, which should not unnecessarily increase cost and restrictive, and it finishes your sentence. So I'll send it.
Look forward to receiving that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Magnus, you have the floor.
Yeah, forgive me. My document here jumped about 20 pages, so I'm trying to figure out where I left off. To Jake's point about maybe adding board members back in, I would really appreciate that. I do understand the perspective from the accreditor, so I think everyone else is well covered there. But I think board members may be worth adding back in. So now looking at Section 2, paragraph C on the bottom of page 37, we talk about cost-effective manner that limits unnecessary financial compliance and administrative burdens. Trying to figure out how to word this. I think it's a little unclear how this would work in implementation, so I'm wondering if the department could understand this, because accreditation is often a gate that institutions have to pass through to get billions of dollars in federal aid over the breadth of the system. So I want to ask who decides that the agency conducts its activities in a cost-effective manner. Is this the agency? Is this the department? And how is it decided that requirements are unnecessary or excessive? And then who determines that a process doesn't advance educational quality? Is that the agency or the department? So just trying to figure out who's making that determination and how it'll be recorded.
So I think ultimately who decides is, the accreditation group would have a say on this, and CKE would have a say on this, and the SDO would have a say on this. This is a response to what we hear a lot from institutions with regard to the paperwork requirements. And you heard in some of the comments from the Indiana institutions, some things that they think are sort of ridiculous in terms of requirements. So it gives us an opportunity in the review process. It gives us an opportunity when in the third party comment process to really have a discussion on that and allow institutions that are affected by that to have a role. I mean, it's similar to what we do really with the forms that we put out with the federal government. We're subject to the Paperwork Reduction Act. Every form that we put out that people have to fill out has to go out for public comment, and people have an opportunity to say this doesn't work for us, or here's a better way to do it. And I think that's really the intent here, is to have an opportunity for public feedback and have at least something. Maybe it's not a bright line standard, but have at least something where we've taken a look at the paperwork requirements and are really forcing the agency to justify why they're collecting the information that they are from the schools.
Any follow-up, Magnus? Okay. Mark, you have the floor.
First, I just want to say thanks to the department, very supportive of this. I think it's very helpful. The only other piece I would add is, you have prescriptive processes. I would say there are instances, at least in institutional accreditation, of either example or recommended processes very often lead to additional documentation, because institutions feel if they didn't follow the guidance, even though it wasn't prescripted, that they run the risk of getting dinged in their accreditation.
Appreciate that comment.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jeff. Michael, you have the floor.
I want to circle back to something that Magnus said yesterday at the outset, which was, while innovation is very important, it should not be driven at the expense of students. And so some innovative models are experimental. The pop-up kiosk training model is concerning. And so along these lines, I just would not want this regulation to then be construed that accreditors must have a process that allows for or must have lower cost models. We can't know at the outset whether an innovative or low cost model can provide students with a high quality education until it's been rolled out. We can look at predictive, we can look at what the infrastructure is, we can look at what the investment is and the promises, but we won't really know until that program has had an opportunity. So it's more the word "not" that I think puts accreditors in a position to have to do something. An institution would come to us and say, you can't restrict us from doing this. This is what the regulation says. So I would prefer the word avoid as opposed to should not. So should avoid unnecessarily increasing institutional cost or restrict innovative, as opposed to should not unnecessarily. Is just a word choice.
Well, I think we do want to have a fairly hard line on that, for the simple reason that we have seen instances where accreditors have stood in the way of innovation and are blocking. And I think and we've seen many instances where accreditors are driving costs up. So, I mean, that's where it's coming from. I mean, I'm more than willing in caucuses and as we go through this process to have some engagement, but we feel pretty strongly on this concept that we should. And again, I understand Magnus's point about innovation. Nobody wants to open up a situation where students are going to be harmed. The intent here is to help students, and again, that can be through shorter programs. But what we have seen so far, students are being harmed today because of the longer times it's taking them to reach degrees. What we call the degree creep and so this is intended actually to help students. I think the risk of unintended consequences is lower than it is in the status quo right now. And again, we want to really try to push the envelope as far as we can with the community that the default ought to be to spur innovation.
Brief follow-up, Michael.
Yeah, I certainly agree with all of those things. I can just tell you from my perspective and what I see, particularly institutions that aren't yet accredited, but even some that are, do come with models that are just really stripped down with the intent of lowering their costs. And maybe those lower costs are passed on to students, maybe they're not. And I just think we should be mindful to not put accreditors in a position that they are forced, or that an institution would argue that there can be no restrictions around at least an assessment about lower costs. So I just want to be mindful of that. I'm not suggesting that anything that you've suggested, Jeff, is not accurate and correct. It is, but there are other kinds of models that would be more concerning.
Yeah, more than happy to have some discussion on that, and maybe we can talk around things about protection, because making sure that in the cost benefit potential harms are factored in, or or validation of models or things like that. But what I really want to make sure is that we're on the same page, that we are trying to increase innovation and are doing it thoughtfully and deliberately.
Thank you. Magnus, you have the floor.
Yeah, I want to thank Michael for bringing that up. And this morning we didn't get a chance to comment on the remarks that were made about innovation specifically. And I would kind of expand on what Michael said. Innovation is an experiment, and experiments, I think, should happen outside of an area where students may be subject to some risk. I would liken it to going immediately to human testing on a drug trial before other work has been done on that. So I just want to raise that point. Innovation is a great thing. I think Jeff brought up the idea of like 90 credit hour bachelor's degrees and things like that. I think that's a model. 3-year bachelor's degree is common over in Europe, and I think that's something that America has been pretty slow on moving towards. But I think that's where I'll leave it.
Thank you, Magnus. Department, any response before I move on?
No, and again, I think all decisions are always a weighing of interests, but I just think we just have to be careful that we don't, try to have a zero risk, level where people, where we stay stagnant, and obviously. Protecting students is a primary concern of the department, primary concern of those that are pushing for innovation. And the worst way to kill an innovative idea or concept or mode of education is to have it fail like on the launch pad. And so, likelihood of success, again, this is a balancing act, but I just think overall we need to do a better job than what the status quo is currently providing us.
Thank you, Magnus. Thank you, Jeff. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Yeah, in one of my prior lives, I definitely have been in this position of having innovation when it was relating to distance ed and direct assessment slowed by accrediting agencies. So I'm sympathetic to where we're heading. I'm also, though, sympathetic to Michael's point of view on, and this goes back to it's not quite a double negative, but this goes back to what I said yesterday, that I was definitely going to comment on the sort of the language in the negative instead of in the positive. And I do think that there are a couple of places in this section where the department would do well, actually, to flip the narrative to the positive of encouraging, instead of sort of sounding like it's going to be a game of, and I keep saying the game because I think there is this sort of fear of like, well, I don't know, like, how are they going to determine if I unnecessarily increased cost or and so I think the flipping it language to the positive, and in C in particular, I would suggest that the department consider, because it says it ends with, and prescriptive processes that do not demonstrably advance. I would just say, and that demonstratively advance educational quality and student achievement, no matter what, whether we're in an innovative institution or a non-innovative institution. Our accreditors are always wanting to, we want them to always advance educational quality and student achievement. So I think there are just a couple of situations where we can say what we mean and it's applicable regardless of the type of institution, the type of accreditor. And so that.
No, I think we hear you on the voice in terms of the way it's written. I think people were trying to have flip things and have the assumption being you go forward, but I think we can work that language out, because I agree we want to sound that we're positive on a number of these factors, and not to use the double negatives to achieve a positive result.
Exactly. And then I just really quickly on D, and I don't know if we're there yet, but so I don't want to bring up issues that I have to raise deep concerns about creating common templates across accreditation. Accreditors, it's the beauty of our higher ed system that we live in a world where we still have a range of different types of institutions, and the whole point of having different accrediting bodies. And this goes to me smack against actually creating the competitive marketplace. Part of having a competitive marketplace is actually having different thoughts and processes around accreditation.
Yeah, there's a little bit of give and take, and where that came from was the concern about of institutions and saying everybody's got their own forms and everybody's forms are different, but they're all asking for the same type of information, and so that was our attempt to try to bring some consistency, because a lot of the transactions were similar. But everybody was different, and if you're an institution, there's a lot of duplication of effort there. So that's where that's coming from.
Thank you, Jeff. Jennifer, if you have more, please put your card up. I'm going to move over to Siri.
Oh, can I just color? And again, that one is, and I know because some people will say, well, you only have one institutional accreditor, but this is really when you have an institution that has multiple accreditors, and everybody's using a different format.
Thank you, Jeff. Siri, please.
I just have 2 sentences to sum up how I'm thinking about everything this morning. Captured accreditors are professional guilds with regulatory power. And as long as the people setting workforce training standards are the same people who benefit from restricting supply, suppressing credential innovation, and inflating the cost and time required to enter a profession, no amount of federal workforce investment will close the shortages, reduce the costs, or reach the communities that need it most, including Louisiana. Restoring genuine accreditor independence is not an abstract governance form. It's the precondition for protecting students from unnecessary costs and barriers, enabling the innovations that employers need, and ensuring that accreditation serves the public interest rather than incumbent professional interests.
Thank you, Siri. Jeff?
I definitely agree with that statement.
Thank you. Mike, please.
Thank you. I think that, there is this kind of false association between innovation and massively elevated risk. There is a huge risk to not innovating in the kind of environment we're in right now. And putting up barriers that prevent innovation, I think, are an important set of issues that we need to think about. And I think there's lots of examples of this as we look at universities across the country, eliminating departments that have 0 students, but considerable faculty costs and other issues. Clearly, there is some accountability in the system and some risk associated with these huge investments in things that are dead-end products. And so I think in some ways that we need to frame our conversation about innovation to say, how do we manage the change that we see around us? I do think as we think of creating new accreditors who are going to be making a case for how they shape that landscape, it wouldn't be unreasonable in the evaluation process to ask them, what is the risk of your failure? And how do you see that impacting the institutions that are involved with it? So, I mean, to the extent that there is a criterion for that, having thought through those issues, I think would be an important matter to consider before approving an accreditor. And I think that comes out in the review of the procedures and the processes, but it may be worth expanding that slightly in that part of the conversation as we go through it. The other part, just to mention, I think on point D on page 38, the idea of finding commonality, maybe the opportunity is not so much across accreditors, but across the triad in some ways. Between the department, the states, and the accreditor, there is certainly a huge amount of duplication. And you could see a case where an accreditor, if they were to emphasize finding ways to simplify that process for the institutions, would not only produce benefits for the students, the taxpayers, but also for the institutions in terms of the significant costs that those redundant reporting streams create.
Thank you, Mike. Department, any comment before I move on?
Agree with that and appreciate the comment.
Thank you. Julie, I am pleased to give you the floor.
Thank you. Something that tickled my brain in the conversation exchange with Magnus and everybody else is it's great to have this desire for innovation. Like, I don't think anybody here is fundamentally opposed to that. But when it comes to the risk and the harm that may or may not come upon students, are we going to put in some kind of additional protections for students that if they're in a program who is embracing innovation, but there is direct harm caused to them, there's additional protections for them to be able to get their federal aid back? Because for student veterans in particular, once those GI Bill dollars are gone, they are gone. Same with tuition assistance. And so I would just like to see a conversation around additional protections for those resources and for those students in the name of innovation.
I think the concern there is, there's a benefit, and if, and people have a choice, and if someone wants to go into a program and that program, and it's an innovative program, let's say, and that program doesn't fit them, I think that's on them if they know sort of what it is going in, just like every other program is on them. And so we're not proposing anything that is so risky that, we're not comfortable putting our own friends and family in such a program. What we're looking at is there are different models, and we have seen it over even just recent history where we have people, because of when courses are scheduled or how courses are offered, who have been able to earn degrees who would not have been able to do it in a more traditional setting. And that's the kind of opportunity that we're looking for. And I think that the horizon that's in front of us is an opportunity to find even lower cost options or quicker options based on what people already know. going into a program. And I think the net benefit to someone, for example, who's a veteran and has earned their GI benefit, is that actually uses up potentially uses up less of your benefits and gives you the ability to go on and do further education. So I'm not inclined to say and it's only for the reason that I don't think we'll have anything that's so risky that somebody's going to get ripped off on it. And what we're looking at here is actually trying to raise the standards so nobody gets ripped off, and that we do have the protections. But I think in a situation like that where someone goes in it, some of it's on you and making sure it's a good fit for your own goals and aspirations.
Jake would like to add, and then I'll come back over to you, Julie, for comment.
Yeah, briefly. I mean, Jeff said, we wouldn't let our own friends and family go into programs that are risky. The point there is, at its core, I mean, this is not something that's happening in a vacuum. Magnus likened this to human trials. Human trials for a drug happen under the supervision of a research board. And similarly, this happens under the supervision of multiple different groups. Ed staff review these accreditation standards. NACICI approves these. And we'll get into the things we look at while considering recognizing accrediting agencies. We've talked about, separation or separate and independent rules that we want to strengthen to ensure that students are protected in here. All of that comes together to provide more oversight and ensure that we are balancing innovation as well as protection of students. And while there is some risk, we're evaluating that risk. It's not happening. It's not an uncontrolled amount of risk. And we are trying to balance placing both the protections in place that are necessary to ensure that, we don't have a gross expansion of programs that are of low quality, but also allowing, accreditors to put forth new ideas.
Thank you, Jake. Julie, please.
Thank you both for your very thoughtful responses. And I'll just end this by saying it came up a lot in the last negotiated rulemaking about data around who are good or bad performing actors. Someone at the table stressed yet again, it is a student's choice. When a student is making a decision and they are wooed by online content and fancy brochures that are on thick cardstock, like when the system is set up to make it look appealing, and when the system is set up or designed to say, you can do this faster, cheaper, here, online, we can meet all of your needs, rarely do those programs actually meet the needs. We have overwhelming data in the veteran community for bad actors that are still approved by the department and by VA. So I would just, again, challenge that we need to make sure that we are considering students when it comes to innovation. And I will always just push for increased protections for them so that they don't get caught up in the fray. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie. Monty, I'm over to you.
Sure, Julie, I'll pick up right on the tail end of that. One of the things that hit me yesterday as we heard the Deputy Secretary make comments is innovation to what end? So it causes me to ask the question, what is the definition of innovation? What is the definition of modernization? And how do those apply to the accreditors? Because frankly, as I read through this doesn't innovate. This does not innovate. This doesn't reach my definition of innovation. So, and let me give you the example. Why should it take a decade to change policy to shorten the time that someone needs to be educated or trained for short-term Pell qualification? Why did that take a decade? I'm not suggesting that was an accreditor challenge, but it was a systemic challenge. And so the question that I have for you is, yes, I want to be sure to protect our students, but I also want to be mindful that there's 64 million working age Americans with a high school diploma or less. What are we really accomplishing if that 64 million Americans are still on the sidelines in this economy, marginalized because they don't fit the structure that some of us believe should be in place? I really challenge this group to think about innovation and modernization in the context of why should it take a decade to make a change in the system that we have? I'll stop there.
Thank you, Monty. Jeff?
I'll tell you my view on it, working in this business for 40 years, and that is this constant tension that we have about people saying, let's go forward and move and innovate. And you're right. These regs don't innovate. these regs allow innovation to occur, and try to remove the blocks. And there's this tension between those who want to innovate, those who want, I mean, short-term Pell is a good example. You know, for some reason, 600 hours was okay and 599 hours was not, right? There was, you know, and there was this bright line forever. But because we have this tension between those who want to innovate and those who want quote unquote guardrails, which are really a euphemism for restrictive regulations, and sometimes overly restrictive regulations, we're going to have that, and it's going to take a while. Anybody that saw the workforce Pell going through, I mean, it's got the best, it's got elements of both camps in there. And it looks like it. It looks like a camel, when it goes through. But it is what it is, and it represents a balance of interests at the time that it was passed. And I think this is always going to be a slow process as long as we have students and veterans on one side and saying, hey, don't go too fast and we can benefit. And people on the other side saying, go faster. There's got to be a balance in between those two, and that's where I think we end up landing. And it's not always going to be perfect, and it's not always going to be fast.
Thank you, Monty. Thank you, Jeff. We're right at 10:30. Would we like to move through the remaining 4 cards, or would we like to break and come back to the cards? Let's take a 10-minute break. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed that extended break. A couple of things before we jump back into cards I want to remind everyone. We are through 40 pages of 150. We have a lot to cover. I'm going to ask that you restrict your comments and your clarifying questions to that which has not been shared previously. I'm going to ask that you do be mindful of the 3 minutes and allow for me to move you along. I will definitely tell you to put back up your card and in the queue, but please let me guide us along so that we can continue moving through the important material that we need to get through. Jeff, anything from you before I get us started again?
No, and we'll, we are committed to trying to move this quick, so we will do what we can on our side too.
Thank you, Jeff. Rebecca, you are next. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Jeff, I just want to comment D in this section. I really appreciate how you're coming at this. Jennifer, your comments, and then Monty, you kind of sealed the deal, expressing your concerns. And one thing that I picked up in reviewing this is that you're looking for some common forms around changing accrediting agencies. I'm curious how you feel about expanding common templates to, because some institutionals are going to work with programmatics to coordinating evaluation schedules, reducing duplicative reporting, facilitating appropriate data sharing as we get into interoperability, and coordinating quality assurance activities, specifically for programmatics around the site visits, workforce Pell, and any other Title IV provisions.
So just let me understand the question. So you're asking is whether we're going to coordinate some of our own paperwork requirements with these efforts?
Well, I'm asking if it's appropriate to extend this language to include these other forms within the accrediting agencies so that they can, in fact, have common forms and have this kind of continuity. So it would include the accrediting agency and maybe even the department enabling these activities.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's an issue for the regulations. But I think to the concept, we are open to streamlining our processes and having some commonality, in them. If people identify that, usually when somebody presents something to us, we give it a good read, and we have made changes in the past to facilitate that. So I mean, but unless it's I don't see anything here in the regulations that we would be willing to include to address that, to broaden this particular paragraph.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Rebecca. Magnus, you have the floor.
Thank you. I want to return to the idea of putting some restrictions on innovative programs that Julie brought up earlier. I have a couple of ideas. One of them would be disallowing access to federal funds first to test and prove that the innovation works on brand new shiny programs that are deemed as like really innovative before we open up the risk of taxpayer dollars. And in addition to DoD funds for students who are not DoD affiliated, their Pell monies and access to federal loans has been loans specifically has been further restricted recently, but Pell Grants are also a finite resource. Just lost my the other idea, and to be fair, my alternate knows a little bit more about this from the accreditor perspective, adding some more requirements to how accreditors deal with student complaints that are put forward directly to the accreditor, and some transparency around that. I think accreditors do try to respond to students and say, "Oh, we've done an investigation," but there are often very little details that are provided in what investigation, because they could just say, "Well, we'll just respond to this email and say, yeah, we looked into it, but we didn't really find anything." So backing up some evidence. I'm not saying every accreditor does this by any means. I don't have enough expertise to make a blanket statement like that. But I'm just thinking one area where transparency and accountability towards innovation can exist. I'm just kind of throwing that out there for us to chew on.
Yeah, so in other sections of the regulations, there are opportunities for third-party comments and for student comments there. And so we think there's lots of opportunities to get input in the current structure as it is now. We do follow up when we do get complaints about an accreditor as well, even when they're not sent to us directly, they get routed over to us. So Beth, do you want to provide any more about what you guys do?
Just quickly, I do want to say that we do have requirements. The accrediting agency must have complaint policies about any complaints they receive, and to include also any complaints they receive against themselves. And that's in 602-23C, and we'll get to that. And we did actually add a little bit of language to make sure that they have to document such complaints and actions in this particular area. But then, as I described a little bit yesterday, but there is a process in between renewal of recognition or initial recognition of an agency, that there's an opportunity that if we, as the department staff, were to see any information that would demonstrate or other materials that would demonstrate that an agency might not be in compliance with its regulatory requirement, with our regulatory requirements, we would take a look and do an inquiry on that. So I think there's a couple levels where that is covered already, but I hear your point.
Yeah, and it comes up more frequent than not, in the review process. But the other side of that too is we have had agencies that have come up and there have been positive comments about them, and there have been negative comments about them. So not everyone who has people who have bad experiences, sometimes not everyone shares the same view that they have. So that's just the one thing to keep in mind.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Yeah, I wanted to respond, Magnus, to the concept of holding back Title IV. When you're starting something new, it's really important to have access to the Title IV. And I know that that comes with risk, which is a good bleed into something, a card being up beforehand. When we're talking about, and I appreciate, Jeff, you struck a balance. You used the word balance, which I'm using a lot too. And I think it's really important when we're thinking about the risk. And Mike, you spoke to sort of risks, but you also used the word product. And I used to, when I was in with higher ed institutions, I used to correct my colleagues. We're not selling widgets. We're selling educational services and a long-term investment to students. And that's something that's actually really rare and unique and I'll call it the business world. It's just, there's nothing else like it. Somebody used to talk about like airlines, and I'm like, yeah, except for they're getting on and off the plane like in 6 hours or 12 hours. This is totally unique. And I think we have to really continue to use that balance of how unique we're a situation we're in when we're talking about how we incorporate innovation. And then the final thing I want to say is I just want to publicly object to Siri's statement because I feel like while it's a completely imperfect model that we currently have, I have certainly had my battles with accreditors over years. I also feel like we live in a country of complete innovation. It's in our DNA. We have 250 years. We look like no other country in higher ed, and that's in part because of our accreditation system. And so while it's imperfect and we can criticize where we stand in this moment, we are innovative. We have been innovative, even with the accreditors that we have. And so I just think it's super important to speak to that we're wanting to be additive and constructive in pushing us forward in the innovation world. I don't think it's necessary to sit here and act as though we haven't been innovative for 250 years. We have been, way before the federal government decided to join the innovation with us.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I didn't address Magnus's point on that, and I just wanted to sort of tie that in with Monty's comment earlier, which is, during that 10 years of Workforce Pell, we did see some innovation regarding, and for example, with the coding boot camps, right? And I would say, that sort of worked out because those programs came out in response to market demand, and most of them didn't charge students, and the employers picked that up because that's what they're looking for. But we saw the good and the bad of that, because of that 10 years play out. And had we funded those programs sort of early on in that 10 years, that may not have been the result that would have come. So I think there are, you always have to take into account there are market forces at play. And as much as I think we're trying to push forth innovation, there is, I never underestimate the inertia in the higher education system. So I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where the bright, shiny new programs are going to get accredited and get funded, right away, even with these changes. I think there's going to be some market play involved, and that's really what we're looking for. We want programs that result in jobs. So thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jeff. Michael, you have the floor.
Just to quickly follow up on what Rebecca had brought up before, just to put a pin in it for a moment, and that is, if we're talking about duplicative effort within the accreditation community, in my view, one of the ways to best eliminate that is to allow institutional accreditors to rely upon the findings in the review process of programmatic accreditors. It is the area that is absolutely duplicative and that we may be allowed to take into account, but we can't let their review stand in lieu of our own. And so if we could do that, and if we could rely upon the review processes and the findings and the determinations of a department recognized, secretary recognized programmatic agency, that would mean that those reviews would not be necessary in full force by the institutional accreditor. And that's the kind of partnership between accreditation that could really reduce a lot of duplication.
Thanks, Mike.
Jennifer, please.
I echo I just want to voice complete support for that. I also think, although I have my opinions about specialized and programmatic accreditors, in a way it's a belts and suspenders, because the institutional would actually in a way be looking, they wouldn't, I don't want to use the term rely necessarily on, but they would have, I do think it would be an efficiency for an institution. It also would allow another pair of eyes on whatever determination the specialized made. So I think it's food for thought. I also did want to point out, I meant to say it when my tent was up, in D seems to currently only apply when seeking change to accrediting agencies. But Jeff, you had mentioned the relationship between programmatics and institutional. So I do think this section needs work because I'm not sure what it's trying to solve for.
Yeah, I think there's also interconnected changes, so there's a theme there. But I appreciate that comment. Thank you. Okay, can we move to the next section?
I would love to move us to the next session. I do want to remind folks that at the top of a topic is when you are able to switch between alternates primaries. I see a number of cards going up. Are these switches or are these substantive? Rebecca, please.
Yeah, I'd like to swap with my alternate, please.
All right, we are bringing Brian Kessler to the table for programmatic accrediting agencies. David, please.
Thank you.
Is this a swap or no, David? No. Give me one moment. Mike, not a swap. Anyone else a swap at the table? Okay. Jeff, was there anything you wanted to add to tee this next section up before I go straight to cards?
Sure. Just to state that we are now moving in our regulations from the organizational and administrative requirements to the required standards and their application, and these come from the statute. And we will start with 602.16.
Thank you, Jeff. David, you have the floor.
Thank you. I have a kind of architectural question to set the stage, but first, the strengthening of student achievement standards within the mission of institutions is something that we observed first and then recommended on NSEKI, because it seemed like the student success standards rules as they existed were very weak. And we were unable to reach conclusions, I would say, that should have been reached if we had had stronger rules. So I welcome that. It's very complicated, and I have a lot of detailed questions, but I just want to start with one. Starting with Cody's presentation yesterday, if you imagine that box and whisker chart, and if we imagine that the first most immediate problem is the bottom whisker, which is showing us the institutions with the lowest graduation rates. We could use other metrics, but let's focus on graduation rates. If we wanted to raise that, we've got kind of three ways to do it. First, as the Undersecretary alluded to, we could be more, we could withdraw accreditation for more schools, which would remove Title IV and probably cause a number of them to fail, which is painful. But that would move the bar up for sure. We could, the words continuous improvement have been used, so we could aim at perhaps simultaneously taking the students that have already enrolled in an institution and through the accrediting agencies, help those students to better succeed. And I think some of the provisions in the rules here are aimed at that. The caution there is we've been doing that for a long time, so we need to do something differently. We need to innovate there. The third way, which I have not seen referenced here, is to just have students match better with institutions. So for example, if a student shows up at a high-priced private school and can't really afford it and has marginal credentials, maybe it would be better to advise them to go do their general education at a two-year institution or something like that. I don't see any of that in here, but I want to ask the department if there's an overall mechanism by which we see student success increase over time that's embodied in the rules.
I think in the presentation that we made yesterday, I think there's an expectation of the process that student achievement levels should be increasing over time, and if they're not, we would want to obviously take a closer look at that. But that's a general expectation of the process, and that's what we hear directly from the accreditors. Is it supposed to be about continuous improvement? But is your question more, so that's a sort of an underlying assumption that's not implicit. Is your question more, is there something in our interpretation of the statute or the regs that goes to that point?
Yes, thank you. I think it's larger than that. If we were intent on upholding very high standards and we were going to see a bunch of schools suddenly lose Title IV, would be very messy and political and all of that. And I think there has been, a tendency to blame the accreditors for not doing that already. But I think the whole triad would have to be involved. There would be state politics involved when a school vanishes, and there would be, have to be support for the accreditor. For example, they could get sued out of existence. It's very complicated and expensive to do that. And I just wonder, to the extent that we want to raise standards, which to the point that would cause institutions to lose accreditation, is there a sense that there's a triad approach to solving that problem, or are we just going to dump it all on the accreditors?
I think there are different roles. Obviously, in the realm of institutional quality, that is squarely with the accreditors. Obviously, from the department, we're looking at student complaints, how they raise, how they manage their funds, their compliance. Obviously the student consumer aspects of that as well. But we're not as quality is not as firmly in our wheelhouse as it is with the accreditors. I mean, it's a concern for us, and to the extent that we can push accreditors, we do that. But I think within the triad, everybody has certain responsibilities, but they're not equal. And what we're focused here on is really on quality, and when you look at dropout rates, that is more on accreditors than probably anybody else in the triad.
Thank you, Jeff. David, if you have additional questions, please remain in the queue. I'm next going to go to Mike. You have the floor.
Thank you. I want to echo David's point about essentially continuous improvement and heightened scrutiny. I don't know if it's allowable under the statute, but I think, the idea that some institutions have perpetually very low completion rates, below 50%, below 25%, on a 6-year cohort basis is something that could be subject to heightened scrutiny and would be like a new framework that we could add to that analysis and would be possible. But that's not what I wanted to say. First, I wanted to say, commend the department for looking at institutional and program level data. I think disaggregating data is really important in this new world where we're becoming more evidence-based. I want to suggest that on identifying minimum expectations of student performance in section A, that we strike the entire sentence that follows minimum expectations of student performance, because it basically opens the door to the idea that if an agency determines that setting minimum expectations is not feasible, I think there's always the ability to set minimum expectations. Your minimum expectation may be extremely low, but having no minimum expectation, I don't think is a door that we would even want to do. So in that sense, I think I'm in alignment with the agency, but also saying, don't let them off so easy. Similarly, in the previous paragraph before it says the agency standards, in the last sentence, it says where feasible and appropriate. It's always feasible and appropriate to have minimum standards. Later in that section, and I won't go through the entire section because I know I'm limited by my 3 minutes, I want to praise the department for measures of educational and economic return relative to tuition and fees. I would add that you consider cost of attendance or room and board and things that go beyond tuition and fees. I would also encourage you to think about time to completion, because although there is a published length of a program, the actual time to completion for students is very different than that. And then I'm a big fan of the federal government's United States Census Bureau PSEO project and employment outcomes. We're operationalizing that in Ohio today. I think explicit reference to that in employment outcomes would be helpful in this section to ground it in data that might be preferred by the department. And then lastly, in small Roman numeral V, much later in this section, it is about fiscal and administrative capacity, and perhaps this is captured elsewhere, but I would say I would like accreditors to be looking at the financial solvency and assurances that should an institution cease to exist or cease to operate programs, which is what we're facing in a constrained market today, that students would be held harmless as it relates to transcripts and having access to transcripts. We've had institutions that have caved that haven't funded transcripts, and we have records custodian issues. I am in Ohio, the inheritor of that role right now for a closed institution. Teach out agreements and things like that that are related to ensuring that students are not harmed when an institution, and institutions do, go to the brink of solvency before they make fundamental decisions.
Thank you, Mike.
That's all great. Rather than bring it up at the table, we'd like to have some sidebars with you on that. And particularly, in how you're dealing with instances where you have to make exceptions to some of these. We're already running into it with the do no harm standards, with people coming up and saying, "Oh, you can't measure us in this condition or that condition." So, I'd love to have more discussion with you. But thank you those were all great suggestions.
Thank you both. Julie, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kayla. I will echo the second half of Mike's suggestions. Super on board for all of those. On behalf of student veterans and military learners, I do want to raise a few questions about this section. As a former student veteran myself and a university employee, I understand the importance of student support services, particularly for disabled veterans. There's a growing body of evidence that shows that student outcomes are strongly correlated to a sense of belonging on their campus. Affinity and identity groups on college campuses, as well as student support offices, are critical for student success and outcomes. With all that being said, how does the department expect this section to apply to support services for disabled veterans and other students with disabilities who may need additional support, such as tutoring, extra test time, or counseling? Additionally, I wonder if the expectation of this section is that if the benefit of support services do not justify the cost, then should a college not offer those services? I don't understand if the department is requiring an accrediting agency to scrutinize the justification or the cost for student support services, since many of these necessary supports may fail a cost-benefit analysis, but they provide immense support to the students and they're required by existing law.
Okay. Well, thanks. Yeah, and I appreciate you bring that up. Obviously, our view on student support services are support services should be targeted to allow everyone that the institution admits to have the ability to succeed. And so if they meet their minimum requirements and be there to help that person get to that, whether they be a student veteran or not. But for veterans specifically, I think it's a large enough group at many institutions, most institutions actually, where it just, it's easy to identify and it's easy to do programming around that. So I don't see it as a burdensome thing for institutions to have to do. And I do think it's part and parcel when you admit a student, particularly when you admit a student veteran, that you do what you need to do to help that student complete and graduate.
Just one follow-up to that. Thank you for that response. I do want to point out that not all campuses offer a veteran resource center. In fact, they're very hard to fund staffing for those for various decisions by the campus. But student veterans find their sense of belonging outside of just the resource center. So I do just want to stress that asking for an ROI to be determined, whether or not an ROI is worth it by an accreditor, like sometimes those services and supports are immeasurable. And I just think that we should probably think that out a little bit more.
Yeah, and I wasn't talking in terms of student resource centers specifically, because I don't think that's necessarily the solution. But I do think there are a suite of services that that you can offer to veterans to meet their needs, and as generations of veterans come through, that's going to change, and will need to be updated. But I do think it's beyond just a student resource center. I mean, a veterans resource center.
Thank you both. Monty, I'm over to you.
Thank you. Going to page 39 here under the success item, which I guess is Roman numeral 1. I understand that it came from statute. So just want to point out that, again, mission differentiation is important here. Very important aspect. And one of the points that I think is necessary at the bottom of 39 is to reference some type of external validation. What we appear to be doing in large part is thinking of comparing institution to institution or program to program, which is important. We should have that. But the extension of college from retention measures and graduation measures to now market measures as to where they go, how well they're employed or not employed, what their earnings may look like. Those external validations, I think, are really important, and to think of them and differentiate them between or as compared to those that are sort of down and in metrics that compare academic programs from one institution to another. So I just would urge some reference to external validation there. Moving over to page 40, the section A. Would like to, in particular around veterans, I think it is critically important that we consider the training and education that veterans receive while they were in service before they get to our institutions of higher education. Because what we oftentimes find is while we're working through the benefits scenario, that military transcript hasn't necessarily been evaluated yet. Therefore, individuals are enrolling in courses that they've already earned skills for, they've already earned an education for. I would urge under section 40, and glad to provide the language, thanks to Jen and others for the good work there, that proposes that we take into account credit for prior learning as part of this section A. I'll stop there for the moment.
Yeah, no, no argument from us philosophically. We can definitely take a look at that. Appreciate the comment.
Okay.
Monty, anything final before I move along? Thank you very much. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Yeah, there's so much here. So I'm a little, I guess I'll just talk for 3 minutes, see how far we get. Or I was wondering whether the department might entertain going sort of section by section a bit so that we're not bouncing all over the place.
Yeah, and this is a big section, so let's see.
Maybe we could stick with like one, the Romanet 1. Like, could we just stick within Romanet 1 or A, up to through Romanet 1 to?
Yeah, I think paragraph A is probably a good place to start.
Okay, so I just wanted to, I'm going to start slightly. So even in one, so A1, I would ask that somewhere in that, I understand the change, but clear expectations actually I think is useful. It goes again to sort of transparency, not just for the institutions and the accrediting agencies, but for the public. So I would love to see clear expectations right up front because it's the modifier to the list. So if we could put clear expectations somewhere, I would appreciate that. That was deleted in the A1. And then on Romanet 1, I just think there's a little bit, I understand where you're going, but I'm a little concerned because this is lifted from statute and some of us around the table, Michael and me, were really involved when this was all being mushed together in Congress back in the day, and Jeff too. Standards for success. So it's very intentional that it says as established by the institution. That was, for better or for worse, negotiated hardcore in Congress by constituent groups. The next sentence that you added, standards for student success must be supported by objective, reliable, and comparable evidence of student achievement. While I have no objection with that sentence, I'm not clear whose standards for student success, because remember that they're being established by the institution. And so for the accrediting agency to demonstrate for all of the standards of all of their, so do you see what I'm saying? There's a little bit of a sticky wicket in those two sentences that I think needs to be fleshed out. So I don't know if I've exhausted my 3 minutes.
You have 30 seconds, Jennifer.
And she's going to take them.
I am. No doubt.
So now going to the capital A subsection, wondering if we could be talking about sort of continue somehow. I understand what Mike Duffy is saying. It's discretionary, and I want to, by the way, applaud the department for being deferential to Congress's words and having it be may. And I think likewise, my guess is that if the agency determines that minimum is because you're being a little bit deferential to the possibility that a school is not, an agency is not requiring minimum expectations, right?
Right. Okay. So, and again, here's the concept. I mean, we're very mindful of the statute, right? It's a tightrope. We think that it's, and Cody showed on his presentation yesterday, so on those spider charts, you see the great amount of variance in between. That's because accreditors accredit institutions that are on a broad spectrum. With that said, there ought to be some, like when we talk about race to the bottom, there ought to be some bottom, as was raised in the last NASIKI somewhere. There ought to be a minimum standard. The other part of that is that there should be an expectation of continuous improvement. So even if you're a 5% graduation rate, then the expectation is we get you to a 6% and instead of going down. We see too many of these institutions, and I think the undersecretary pointed that out in his remarks, where they're in the teens in some instances, and they continue to get accredited, and that's really what we're trying to focus on in raising the student outcome. So we want to, we know that the boats are at different depths in the water, but we want to raise all the boats.
We're at time. I'll circle back to you.
Okay.
Thank you. Michael, you have the floor.
Thank you. So Jeff, you provided a primer yesterday in your slides on the history of this area. And I do think it's important just for a moment to point out how the statute got to the point where it did, and to maybe for the benefit of everybody who wasn't there. And I was the primary negotiator in 2009 when we negotiated these regulations from the Higher Education Opportunity Act. But something remarkable happened in the statute that I think is useful to point out, and simply pointing out for the record, and to maybe give the department an opportunity to give its viewpoint on this in relation to these regulations. But at the time that the Higher Education Opportunity Act was being negotiated, the Congress stepped in and really made an explicit statement indicating that nothing in this section, meaning limitation on the scope of the criteria, shall be construed to permit the secretary to establish any criteria that specifies, defines, or prescribes the standards that accrediting agencies or associations shall use to assess any institution's success with respect to student achievement. So when in 2009 we were negotiating, renegotiating again in 2019, and addressing it again under the previous administration, it's always been mindful of that. And so I just want to hear from the department, how you're balancing that tightrope. And again, I think it's important for everybody around the table to at least be aware that that is a significant part of the statute and the authority. And Congress has every opportunity to change that, and hasn't done so thus far. And so I just think in full transparency that's an important consideration, because we do have to work from congressional intent, as outdated and old as it may be. This was an instance where Congress was really clear.
So, and having worked on these in the past myself, being a former committee staffer, I'm mindful of that too. I also get to work with lots of lawyers, and so I think sort of the first thing to state is that these regulations, before they ever went to you, were reviewed and passed on by our Office of General Counsel. We also ran them by the Office of Management and Budget's General Counsel, and so we believe that they're legally sufficient and compliant with the requirements of the HEA. We do not believe we are creating new standards and that we are going beyond that. So that's that's sort of the other side of the tightrope that Jennifer was talking about earlier. I mean, we're trying to move this ahead, and we're trying to move this ahead within our legal constraints. And I'll let Jake talk a little bit more about some of the rationale and why the General Counsel's Office thought we had the support for this.
Yeah, adding to that, we are very mindful of the statute and not going beyond that. If you look at the architecture of this, the way we split all of these out, it mirrors essentially the statutory framework. All of these are added as aerator things underneath it. That's reflective of the fact that these are with the really more of the way the department is looking at what accreditors are providing to show that they're satisfying these standards. You'll also notice with some of these things, for example, in Romanet 1, where we add, the only real addition there is that you have to provide the standards must be provided by the institution, must be objective, reliable, and comparable evidence. It's not really an additional requirement. It's just showing documentation and what actually is going into those standards. And that's really kind of followed through here. And it still gives great deference to accreditors to set their own standards. A was brought up earlier in regards to the minimum expectations rule, and the fact that accreditors can decide that it might not be feasible for them to provide that minimum expectation. That goes back to our statutory authority. Actually, if we went in and said you have to basically hit objective X and everybody has to follow that, that would be in gross violation of the statute. But by allowing accreditors to explain why they can't establish a minimum standard and giving them the deference to make that decision on their own, we believe that that's compliant. This balances that by creating a transparent framework where they have to explain why that doesn't work for them, and it allows us to see what they're considering while they're doing this. And then as that circular logic rolls forward, it allows us to evaluate whether or not their standards also fulfill the statutory requirement.
Thank you all. Magnus, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks to Michael for bringing that up. That's an area that I simply don't know enough about, but I was wondering. So I appreciate some additional context from Ed there. So staying on this top section here. So Romanet 1 on page 39. So it kind of expands the standard for student success, but I don't think it adequately defines objective, reliable, and comparable evidence of student achievement, and defining those terms and requiring agencies to measure success based on reliable federal data sources is critical. So maybe I think if we're looking at the language itself, after it says and comparable evidence of student achievement, we can say from public federal data sources like the College Scorecard or the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. And then at the end of that paragraph, restore where feasible, add at the end the agency's standards for success with respect to student achievement must instead of may. I think Jennifer brought up may earlier. I could be have used. So I think I would prefer for the benefit of students for that to say must as opposed to may. That's at the very bottom of Romanet I. I think it.
Sorry, I'm just trying to track you there.
Yeah, and I may
The
have,
bottom-
have gotten lost.
Romanet I.
Or Romanet 1. I'm sorry.
Romanet
Yeah, but a.
Jake, will you turn on your mic?
A1
Romanet 1.
Mm-hmm.
That says should.
Should. Oh, I think maybe I got lost here.
We're talking this one here, right?
Yes.
I don't see a must there.
Are you talking about
Is it the
A1
language that's on the
Romanet?
screen, Magnus?
No, I think it's in the next paragraph.
It's on
the
page
big letter
3.
A.
The minimum
Page
expectations
3.
may include but are not limited to the consideration
Yes.
of.
So at the very bottom of that paragraph where it says may include, I'm thinking that must would be a better way to say that.
That's permissive because we believe the statute does not allow us to make that a
To say
must.
must. Okay.
Yeah, this is the tightrope, right? We can make them disclose to us what they consider, but we can't tell them what to consider within that.
Okay. Thank you all. Jeremy, thank you for your patience. And then David, I'm over to you. Jeffrey, thank you for your patience. And then I'm over to you, David. Yes, please.
Sorry, I wasn't quite sure who you were calling on. So first of all, I want to say, Monty, thank you so much for the, definitely would agree with you on the expansion of prior learning assessment. I think that's definitely something we should consider. Also, I really want us to caution on the use of federal data sources. As we kind of learned yesterday, the IPEDS data is, considered first-time, full-time students for undergrads, and that just simply, for the most part, isn't indicative of a university or potentially a program's performance. One thing I would like to propose, and whether it's for discussion or for the department to consider, is it seems like in the outcomes areas we're missing a couple of really valid points or valuable points of understanding programs' performance. Julie mentioned earlier our students with accommodations and so forth, and I think having an understanding of that population that a institution serves in creating, whether it be a benchmark for completion, placement, et cetera, should be considered along with the credential level that the program is offered at, as well as the learning modality. There's a lot of data out there that shows that online learning programs typically do not perform as well as an on-ground or potentially a competency-based or hybrid program. So those are things that we would like for the department to consider adding in language that would accommodate for those. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, one of the few things that I get to do, one of the few changes I get to make is I pulled out the reference on federal. It's a constant fight here at the department with thinking that federal data sources are the only data sources that are out there. It came up. We got some very good suggestions during Workforce Pell, for example, with some of the state UI records and incorporated that. So yeah, so there are state records, and there are sometimes even commercial sources of information that are good and even better than the federal source. So we agree with that, and that was actually one of my contributions, is I did take out federal references on that. So.
Okay. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Jeff. David, over to you.
Thank you. Quick question, a definition of program level in Romanet 1. I looked in the definition section, but I'm not totally clear. For an institution, does that mean a bachelor's degree is the program, or does it mean a major in chemistry is the program?
Yeah, so for example, a master's degree in chemistry is the program.
But what about at the bachelor's degree?
Well, yeah, or the bachelor's degree or the associate's degree.
Okay, so an
Yeah.
associate's degree in chemistry is an individual program.
Yeah.
And so this would be new, although we're doing some of this, it would be an additional burden to create all those reports. I will be the guy doing it. And a lot of those, I mean, we have to recognize that a lot of those will not have reliable and comparable evidence because of the sample size. Reliability gets divided by square root of n. And if n is small, it's not going to be very high.
So how are you reporting data on those programs into iPads and recording them on the National Student Loan Data System?
Sure. We report graduates, for example. That's the main thing. And that's really the point about programs, is that for an undergraduate institution like mine, the program doesn't really kind of exist until the registrar signs off on that all of the requirements have been met. It's not a cohort, in other words. So we can't, for example, produce a cohort graduation rate for an undergraduate biology program. It wouldn't make any sense. I do have an alternative suggestion. I presented a problem, but I have a solution for it.
That's always the best way.
So part of the statutory language included course completion originally, but it doesn't show up here. But I think course completion is actually an underappreciated mechanism that drives everything that follows, including all of those ROI outcomes downstream. If students are not successfully completing programs, then they're ultimately not going to have good outcomes. And so an assessment program or student achievement program based around course completion, thought of broadly, through the curriculum that comprises a program, would be a robust, and I would suggest, new way to get at continuous improvement that we're not doing now.
Okay. Obviously, you can't expound on that whole thing in 3 minutes, and we are trying to move through. Is there any way that you could do a write-up of the rationale and give us a little bit more background on that and the idea, so we can take a look at it, and maybe we'll pull you aside and have a caucus and discuss it in a little bit more detail?
I would love to, and I'd like to note that it relates to Romanet 12, which we will get to in due course.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, David. Jennifer, you have the floor.
I'm going back to capital A on top of page 40. So Jeff, earlier, just going back to the conversation, the dialogue you and I had, I would love to see continuous improvement as a term. We talk about it all the time, and I think it would be useful somewhere in the context. I can sort of work something up, but in the context of minimum expectations, if you're going to put that in, so that I think that helps to some degree in my view. So that's just sort of first point. And then I don't love and describe how the agency will take adverse action against an institution that fails to meet. The reason I don't is I don't think it belongs here. So it's not necessarily that I don't appreciate it. It's just that there's an enforcement section, and I feel like it could live in the enforcement section rather than here, because I don't think it just folds into the demonstration that you have standards on student success. So that's.
But to be clear, you're not saying that there shouldn't be consequences.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely a supporter of consequences, and even having them be clear that there's a, a process and an understanding of what that looks like. I just think it already, to some degree, already exists, and that piece needs to be beefed up, or whatever in the enforcement section.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
And I can stop and let other people go. And
You've got a remaining 1 minute.
oh,
You don't have to take it, right?
I wanted to ask, and I'm not necessarily advocating for it. I'm a little bit torn. But in subsection 1, subsection 2 under A, where it talks about program completion and graduation rates. I think I understand. I guess I want to understand what you mean by which must be considered in conjunction with program quality and academic standards. And bottom of page 40. So I would like to understand the clause, the which clause. And I also wanted to ask, why not include retention? Because to me, retention is really, I know some people consider it an input and not necessarily an output, but year over year retention to me is something that is a really important demonstration. It obviously leads to completion and graduation rate. But so retention is something that's always been something that I look at.
We'll take a look. Obviously, again, you know what tightrope we're walking, but appreciate the comment.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jeff. Michael, you have the floor.
I would echo Jennifer's comments about the placement of the enforcement sentence. I do think that there is a whole section that already talks about this. And I want to be mindful that by using the word minimum, it has the propensity to really become a bright line. Either as institutions are moving through the recognition process, and the department staff and the NSEKI are looking at how to apply this particular regulation. By the requirement for identifying minimum expectations becomes, if you don't meet that minimum, then automatically you're determined to be out of compliance. And so I think there needs to be some clarity around if there's an expectation for minimums, then is there an opportunity for remediation, or is it one time below the minimum and you're out of compliance and therefore the maximum time frame kicks in and you have to be on an enforcement action therefore? So I just think that needs to be clarified. I think you could really lose the first minimum in that sentence and just say identify expectations of student performance, and then talk about, well, if you can't set minimums, then here's what you have to do otherwise. So I'll certainly work with my constituency to bring some language over. Are we going past A just a little bit? Can I go down to 3? Post-completion placement, employment, or continuing education? Okay. All right. So placement and employment are two, I think we use them interchangeably, but they are different kinds of things. And one is, placement being, an action, and employment being an outcome. And so I think we just want to be mindful about what we're asking there. And I wonder also if the department might consider also concepts around as outcomes, employability or employer and graduate satisfaction surveys, if that might be useful data to also assist in demonstrating value that individual students, graduates, and employers have from programs. And then lastly, on number 5, having just finished a wonderful week here a few months ago on the AHEAD committee, we talked a lot about the annual earnings premium, if I'm remembering the term of art there. And I wonder if it might not just be that if a program is identified as having not met the annual earnings premium, that would be sufficient for this idea that accreditors would then look at that program, because the department has already made a determination on economic return relative to tuition and fees or cost. So again, to reduce duplication, either allowing or expecting that accreditors would follow up on that finding by the department and not requiring accreditors to do their own work in this regard, because as you and I have already discussed, Jeff, accreditors don't have access to a lot of this information except through what it receives from the Department of Education. So I just wonder if that process might stand in lieu of 5 or be tied together in some way.
That's certainly an approach that you could take. I don't think we would want to say, because it's redundant, right? That in and of itself is what we're expecting, but I don't think there's anything that would preclude an accreditor from using the earnings premium tests that are out there for loans as a condition. But every student is not a student loan borrower, for example. So I think you do have a broader set of equities that you're probably looking at in here, but including measures that the department has, I don't think there's nothing that excludes that from this list, but I don't think that in and of itself is the only test. And again, we're trying not to be prescriptive here, but I think if we were I think you'd be on the hook by basically trying to justify like why that test actually meets the requirement for everybody that's a student there. I think you can always obviously use the measure, but I'm not sure it would be enough.
Thank you both. AD, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just want to commend the department on the flexibility given to accreditors of these minimum expectations. Although Jake already said whether you wanted to or not, their statute requires it. But since a point was made about perhaps having stricter requirements here, I do think from maybe just offering a different perspective, having that flexibility with accreditors, knowing the institutions, especially for students, whether it's low income, special needs, others, that if we set specific bars that everyone has to meet these expectations and require institutions to meet some arbitrary guidelines that actually might have a negative effect on those students, whether that means that the institution won't want to take students that are riskier for meeting those expectations. I think this actually flexibility is not only required by law, but actually does help student outcomes, especially those perhaps most at risk from not meeting them. I have other comments that are later on in section D, but I think we'll wait for after lunch for those.
Thank you, AD. Jake, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think that actually raises a point that also ties back to Mike's point. I think that that's kind of the importance of that first sentence in A, where it just says identify minimum expectations of student performance. Not really giving much more detail there leaves that to the accreditors. Obviously, if you don't have a minimum, the lack of minimum is itself a standard, right? So I think, like you said, that leaving that flexible for the accreditors, it does allow them to draw the lines where they think are necessary in terms of different student populations and, to add those different layers of clarity. I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for us to go in and, dictate very specific, rules as to what those minimums have to look like. Those are things that they have to decide on their own, and whether or not they'll want to go down to very specific student type populations and, enumerate different standards is kind of part of their purview. Again, if they do, we want to see what those minimums look like. But I think you're right, that flexibility is very important, both in terms of compliance with statute, but also in terms of the reality that some accreditors are serving institutions that have very diverse student populations and with different needs.
Thank you both. Magnus, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. To AD's point, I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate you bringing that up, and Jake, the explanation there as well. I would hope, though, if certain guardrails are put in place and schools would say, oh, we're not going to accept students who might be higher risk that feels to me that it would probably violate some kind of non-discrimination rule of some variety, perhaps. It's just my gut feeling. I don't have anything to back that up right now. But my real point here is that I want to apologize for earlier. I for my lack of clarity. I was looking at two different musts, and there are two different musts that I would like to talk about. So Romanet 1. So 602.16.1, Romanet 1, where I'm looking at, and this goes back to federal data sources. So the first thing I'd like to say is that, yes, to Jeff's point, federal data sources are not the only data sources out there, but at least in terms of like earning metrics, it's probably fair to say that they might be the best around, maybe. Just putting that out there, food for thought. So adding back in some reference to public federal data sources, I think would be great. And then I want to talk about the should at the end of that sentence, the very last word on page 39. And does should equal must in that case? Because I think I would maybe want to see must, but I'm open to further interpretation on that one. Bottom of page 39.
Should, which?
Scroll up. No, up. That one, right at the bottom of those. He wants that to be must. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can't be must. It has to be should. Again, that comes down to the statute. This comes down to things that we would like to see, that we want to see, and that we will consider, and we really, really want accreditors to provide. And not providing these things would obviously make it harder for us to judge whether or not you're complying with the statutory criteria, but we can't write must because that would then compromise our statutory authority. We'd be going too far there. So again, we have to leave some degree of flexibility in here for the accreditors.
Sure, thank you. So putting it back out there for federal data sources, I would love to see some kind of reference there, not necessarily a requirement, but say these are good examples of publicly available data sources that may offer us the best insight, sort of the intent there. And then the second must I was talking about is the one in paragraph A underneath that, at the top of page 40. Instead of may include, must include, but I think you gave a similar reason for why that has to be may and statutory. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Magnus. There are a couple more cards, but I want to be mindful of getting us to lunch too. So I'm going to go to Mark and then Jennifer, and then we'll try to get in Siri.
Okay, so I want to go back to David's recommendation on course completion. I think that's a huge mistake. I think it's more burdensome than degree completion. I think there's a way to do degree completion. I also think that course completion is sort of like a biological marker when your outcome is like death or life. And in fact, it doesn't give you any indication of the stop out problem that we saw in the presentation yesterday. You can complete all your courses, but still stop out and not finish. And that is still an institutional problem. So that's point A. Point B is on the earnings premium piece. While I understand it's important, it's certainly very popular these days, and it's codified in law in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I'm not sure it belongs in accreditation. I think it belongs in the department on an annual basis, not on once every 10-year basis. So I think you want to think about the outcomes here that you really want to look at once every 10 years. And such, for example, the earnings premium in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act doesn't give you a decade for your program to demonstrate value. So I think you want to think about what are the right high-level measures, some sort of scope for outcomes that makes sense to look at decennially, every decade for back of that. I'm not good at English. We'll put it in equations, then I'll get it down. But anyway, so I think that's something to think about is what makes sense to look at on every decade as opposed to what should be under continuous monitoring. And I think the earnings premium is a piece that's already in law, at least for students who have federal financial aid. And then the third piece, very sensitive to the issue of institutions admitting riskier students. My institution had 60% Pell. I think if you want to go down that road, you don't want everybody accepting riskier students. You want institutions that know how to have success admitting riskier students. And so I think that this access for all at all institutions is why we have the problems we have. And so I think we got to be very careful there about saying, let's care about the riskier students. Let's care about getting the riskier students into the institutions that know how to help get them to successful completions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
And I don't necessarily think it's one size fits all on that, because I have seen very successful models of institutions where they have had, and to Julie's point earlier, more intensive support services for a group of students that were promising, but for one reason or another in the admissions process, didn't hit all the marks. And so I think, sometimes they call them probationary students, things like that. But just I think we're mindful that there's a lot of ways to get there. And I don't think we would want to preclude any of those.
Yeah, no, I think we're in absolute agreement. I'm just saying that it is all too often used, well, we don't have success because we have riskier students. The onus is on the institution to provide the appropriate supports for those students to succeed.
Thank you, Mark. Beth, did you want to speak on that?
I did. I wanted to speak on the earlier point about what do you want to codify to look at every 10 years? And although this is put in, as Jeff had talked about right at the beginning, with 5 stars of a section that we're not getting into, but if you go to 60219B, it talks about that an agency must demonstrate that it has and effectively applies monitoring and evaluation approaches. And those specifically include periodic reports and collection and analysis of key data and indicators identified by the agency, including but not limited to fiscal information and measures of student achievement. So student achievement would be one of the elements where we would expect more periodic reports. So I just wanted to point that slightly different out.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I also intend to say that that's an area where when you're doing it every decade, you want to demonstrate a record of continuous improvement if the levels are low.
Do you want to continue taking questions, or we are 2 minutes from the lunch hour? Should we move to lunch?
How many cards we have? 1, 2,
3.
3.
Oh, on mine.
Okay.
Still 3.
Okay, still 3. Let's do 2.
It's a terrible thing to do to me up here. All right. Jennifer, you were next.
I want to talk about may and should later after lunch. But my question is, can you explain to me what you mean by standardized assessment scores? Page 41 for standard is one of the, because it can, yeah.
Yeah, that would be to the extent students are taking certain, standardized tests. Some exams have LSATs, MCATs, something that has a standardized score.
So that was my question. So that's sort of like LSATs. Like I took my LSATs 4 years after I went to college. Like I just don't even assessments, and I'm not even sure schools know what. I mean, I know Trinity didn't know how I did on my LSAT. So I'm not even sure. I guess my question is, there are assessment testing that happens. Like, I guess some people do that in a different sort of way, or institutions do that in a sort of different way. But I'm not sure how you would use LSATs or something that's an entry to the next stage of life. So this needs to me to be clarified about what we mean by it.
May include, right? This is something. No. I'm just adding the clarification that an accrediting agency could include this as part of the standards that they want to look at. Maybe within specialized accreditors where you're dealing with, or accreditors who choose to, specialize in certain types of institutions that are providing certain types of programs that require, I'll be honest, I'm not totally familiar with standardized assessment along the way. That matters more. I use the example of an LSAT because that's what I had to take. But
exactly.
There are obviously many standardized assessment tests, and we wanted to leave that flexibility that agencies could include that as part of their standards, but they don't have to include that.
And I love the discretionary part. It's just that I'm not even sure the department. I mean, I guess that's a policy conversation. We can take it back, and I don't want to.
It's a valid data point, and it shows how that student did relative to the cohort that took the assessment. And again, it's optional. It's not limited to. I think it's a valid data point that can be included, and because this is not sort of one size fits all or even required, we would suggest leaving it in.
I just think that we need to know what it means. So I'll leave it at that. I'll just give you one quick example. I would not want my law school to be skewed. But it's an input, first of all, which I think is kind of funny that you're including an input like this. But I didn't do so well on my law school entrance piece. I did well on my bar. So I just don't understand why it would be a demonstration of a quality of my law school that I didn't like, that its acceptance rates of people with LSAT scores of X. So
Yeah, so we're not looking at the front end of it, we're looking at the back end of it. So if you're an undergraduate institution and you have pre-law programs and your students go on and get the LSAT, that's sort of an indication of the achievement levels of people that came out of that program. We're not looking at the entrance exams of the program. So if you need if we need to clarify that, we can clarify that. But again, it's output focused, not input focused.
Thank you. The second and final card for before lunch is Siri, please.
I promise only 2 sentences. Requiring accreditors to identify minimum expectations across licensing, completion, employment, and economic return, and to describe precisely how they'll take adverse action against programs that fail those expectations converts accreditation from a membership service into the quality gatekeeper that Congress intended it to be. The occupational context qualifier is not a loophole, but a precision instrument. It ensures these standards serve workforce supply and student protection simultaneously, rather than reducing complex professional preparation to a single earnings metric that would eliminate the very pipelines, rural health, community mental health, primary care, and medically underserved areas that produce essential workers for the communities least able to absorb those losses.
Thank you, Siri. When we come back, we have David and Brian in the queue. Jeff, anything in closing before lunch?
Enjoy your.
We're going to give everybody a full hour, so 1:05. We won't begin before 1:05. Thank you.
Get 5 minutes.